Welcome back to the Politbureau. So on Facebook, political analyst Lukona Mnguni writes about, quote, divorcing President Jacob Zuma as his president after the Gupta landing. Yes, we have been down there as well. Remember that. But anyway, Mnguni writes further. He says, my issue with people who waited for the total collapse to stand up to Zuma's leadership, thuggery, is that those people chose politics and the positions ahead of the country. These people presented with a choice in Mangaung decided to be blind and rise on the back of Zuma's popularity for personal political success.
Fear for one's life, fear for one's family, fear of losing one's job, fear of being compromised in terms of maybe future career prospects. But that climate of fear in the more formal sense shouldn't be underestimated, because we already had, as Mr. Nene himself pointed out, all sorts of so-called intelligence reports which we're going to come to in this context as well.
Well, to tap into that culture of fear, we still have Professor Seepe, and let's welcome Nomboniso Gasa. She is an Adjunct Professor of Law at the University of Cape Town. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let's start there, Nomboniso. The mic doesn't have a battery. Okay, we're going to try and sort that out quickly. Professor Seepe, let's go to you then. This culture of fear, what exactly does it entail?
Well, first of all, I mean, Praveen does articulate it in terms of personal interest. I mean, the fear of one's job, fear of one's life, fear of, But what it does show is really the concern that people said, that the real test of democracy and commitment to democracy is when people are in power, not when they're out of power. Remember, in the past, we used to say people are tried and tested. This is a real test when you are in power, when people begin to be more concerned about their jobs. So that is the first thing that we need to pack. And the second thing that you are also raising is really the issue of how do you attribute the silence of all these great struggle stalwarts who are in cabinet, who are also MPs. Remember, there's been 8 motions of no confidence. Yeah. And it was the ANC that stood by. So effectively what the judge was saying, what did you do and who was supposed to do what? He was actually saying, in as much as you can point one person, the reason why things happen is also because the collective itself does allow that.
Nomboniso Gasa, I understand that your mic is now, the mic is now on. This culture of fear, and when you look, for instance, at what has happened in the NPA, where former President Jacob Zuma faced these corruption charges, yet the NPA doesn't go forth with prosecuting the president. It's only after he is fired as president of the country that they're bold enough to say that we will prosecute you. How much of a role does politics play when it comes to this culture of fear?
Oh, well, all of us would like to believe that the problem is only with the politicians, right? But actually, if we really are going to be honest about what happened in the last 8 years, we also need to ask other people why they were silent.
Like
right?
who, for instance?
Well, you can ask me. You can ask Sipho, you can ask so many others. What role did we play?
What role did you play then? Let's
go that. I'll come to that. If we look at the NPA, for example, we must also remember that right after Zuma's ascendancy in Polokwane, right, that actually there was a push to drop the charges that Zuma was facing, right? And it's important to then say, what role did that play? So NPA itself was used as a political football, right? And we need to think about what roles did we play as individuals, as collective, whatever. Both ANC, it's easy to say ANC politicians should have done A, B, C, D. They didn't, and they must answer to that. But I also think that we need to ask the kind of society that we have become that allowed and even justified and protected the politicians as we're doing.
Do you think that you should have been more louder?
I was very loud.
You were loud, yeah, yes. But you think that you should have been more louder, or was no space for someone?
No. I took the space. I used the space in the best way I could, right? And I paid for that.
Have you ever confronted the former president, though? And said that, listen, I feel like you are a poor leader.
Well, I never had an opportunity to meet him, but I certainly wrote and spoke and did all of that to actually say, listen, that even before Zuma ascended, to say, listen, this is not the way we should be going. And I think I raised this because in future, I think it's important to listen to voices that go against the grain. I think it's important now to listen to voices that are going against the grain. I think it's important for many of us to avoid falling the trap, in the trap of the politicization of the Zondo Commission. I think many of us should actually speak in defense of the integrity of the Commission. When politicians, as EFF did this week, when politicians start throwing stones at the Zondo Commission, the Commission itself, where then evidence leader Paul Pretorius has been called a bastard, I think it's important that we should call on Judge Zondo to actually use the provision in Section 12 of the Act of the Zondo Commission and say use that, because you have the powers to make sure that people do not disparage, people do not abuse, people do not undermine the work that the Commission is doing.
Professor Seepe, that's very important. It is not only about the now, it is also about the future. People mustn't keep quiet. Right now, the State Capture Commission of Inquiry is coming under attack, not only from the EFF side, but also from people within the ANC. As we indicated earlier on, you heard what Mzwandile Masina had to say about this Commission of Inquiry.
Yeah, just before dealing with that, let's also deal with the history of the NPA. Number one, it is also not true that the former president, did not appear in court. He did appear in court under Vuka Shabalala. He appeared in court under Herbert Msimang. He appeared in court under Nicholson. And all those three judges felt that there was a lot of politics that were at play. And one of the things that was also said by, actually, I think it's Vuka Shabalala, was that this case has been limping from one crisis to the other. So there was
But then the SCA then says that it's not your place as a judge to identify politics.
But the point I'm making is that the former president was hauled before the courts, and as he would be hauled before the courts right now. But it is also true that people like Sean Abrams, once he realized that there's a new chief in town, he started showing the type of courage that is expected, where he should supposed to act without fear of. But the point that we cannot run away from is that once you have politicization of everything, which Mokgwe was also saying this very week, to say he's very concerned about also what seems to be populism that is beginning to encroach within the judiciary. So effectively what we need to do is to start pausing that where did we go wrong and how do we make sure that this a chapter in our democracy. And this is why the Commission is very important, because it should take us there in terms of what should not happen,
Nomboniso,
and including the rest.
Yes, I think we should not confuse ourselves and the public. This is what I am putting forward, that the role that we have played as people who participate in public debate, the way in which we have embedded ourselves with very corrupt ministers, with ministers even then, even before the State Capture Commission was actually established, with ministers who were disreputable, the way in which we played a role in making. So my point is not that President Zuma did not appear in court. I'm very aware of that. But I'm saying let us start with when the charges against President Zuma were dropped on the basis of the so-called spy tapes. We could have separated. We could have said, listen, let the courts decide. So if we do not interrogate our roles as civil society, as people to whom politicians come to in order to have public justification. If we do not interrogate that role, we are going to find that even now, as the Zondo Commission is unfolding, that we are still playing roles of embedded people.
And we might get back to that circle again. And the question then is, what did you, both of you, now this question is to both of you, as academics do to ensure that there is this pushback against trying to, how could I put it, loot the state, loot state coffers, and highlight this issue, even from an academic point of view?
Absolutely.
Ms. Gasa, let's start with you.
Well, firstly, I think that many of us tried, it was almost like spitting against the wind, right? When you spit against the wind, the spit comes at you. Nobody was prepared to listen. That's the first thing. And I think there are very difficult conversations that we should have as colleagues, because we cannot ask of politicians to behave in a way that is morally acceptable in society, in line with the Constitution, and in line with the values of the society, if we do not ask ourselves those kind of questions. I think, secondly, we also need to be unashamedly admit the fact that some of us provided intellectual justification, often very limp, but
from an academic point of view.
From a public commentary as well, right?
Sorry, Ms. Gasa, we're running out of time. Prof. Seepe, just your closing remarks on this issue. What should you have done as an academic to make sure that there is this pushback?
No, actually, I don't think I should have done anything different. My position has always been clear that if you are going to be accusing people, it must be evidence-based, and there must be fairness, and the institutions of democracy should also serve their purpose to be able to act without fear or favor. And but what I will not do is to try to belong to a mob, a lynch mob. My position is very clear that if you want to criticize whatever I said, you can find my writings and take them one by one.
And you have
I've got. Actually, I'm even coming up with a book on that. But what you cannot do is to find people guilty by suspicion, by association, and by accusation, which is where we are. We are in a toxic environment where people think that they are devils and they are saints. And I don't think society is not that complex. And there are judges who come up with different views on the same very issue, and it does not mean they are dishonest.
True. Quickly.
Quite frankly, what we don't want is to be like people who defend apartheid, who pretend as if they never supported it. And I think that we need to have a very, very honest conversation, and this is very disappointing for me because we ask of public.
Yeah.
We are in a position of privilege where people are watching us, people are listening to us on TV, and we refuse to take responsibility.
Okay,
that is a fundamental problem in this
Apologies,
society.
we've ran out of time for this one as well. After the break, it's Spinners and Spanners in red overalls. Thank you guys so much for being part of this.
Thank you.